come now to the highlight of the evening. Matt Rhodes will introduce our guest speaker.
I'm glad she kept going. I'm not the highlight of the evening. Author, editor, actor, sportsman. The list of nouns describing tonight's guest is undoubtedly as long and diverse as the career he has enjoyed and shared with millions of people through his books, his articles, his films, and his countless interviews. I don't think there's anyone in this room who hasn't at some point in their life been exposed to one of George Plimpton's contributions to America's literary and artistic culture. I've known George since 1995, when through an odd twist of fate, he contacted me about a soon-to-be-completed biography of Truman Capote. At that time, I was a student at the University of South Alabama, and having returned home from class one afternoon, I found a message on my answering machine. "Hello, this is George Plimpton. Please call me at your earliest convenience." Needless to say, I couldn't understand why the editor of the Paris Review and one of the most successful and popular authors of the past 40 years had called me. It was indeed a shock and a surprise that I wanted to share with everyone. And I did almost immediately, and continuing for the next 30 minutes. I called my wife, my in-laws, my parents, my grandparents, friends from work, and my high school English teacher to share the exciting news. All of them were quite impressed, but in my excitement I had forgotten one thing. I'd forgotten to call him back and find out what he wanted. Fast forward another 30 minutes, and I suddenly find myself in the position of having asked to be both an interviewer and contributor to the book. It was a tremendous honor and a job that I enjoyed completing immensely. It also said something quite significant about the person he is, that he would ask sight unseen someone whom he had never met to participate in a project of this scale. Since that time, and during occasional meetings in subsequent years, I learned much more about George. I learned that he takes a genuine interest in whomever he is with and wherever he is visiting. During a visit my wife and I made to New York, and during a later trip he made to Mobile, he took the time to get to know us and to inquire about our lives. He wanted to know about my career in politics and what my wife's life and work in the shipping industry was like. He wanted to get to know the friends that we had with us that evening. And he was full of questions about Alabama football. Had there been time, I'm sure he would have also asked about Auburn. But that's George. It doesn't matter if you're Norman Mailer or Norman the Mailman. You're treated as someone important and someone with something important to contribute. I will certainly continue to be impressed by and amazed with his professional accomplishments. However, it's not George Plimpton the author, but George Plimpton the friend that I will always value. And I'm sure by the end of the evening, each of you will also have made a new friend. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. George Plimpton.
Well, that's an awfully nice introduction, and I value your friendship and what you have to say about me, and I will take you around to other places in the States to have you repeat what you just I've enormously impressed tonight by a number of things, of course. One of it, that this is a black and white party that you were asked to emulate the famous party that Truman Capote gave in the Plaza Hotel all those years ago. I went to that party, being a friend of Truman's at that particular point. Our friendship collapsed a bit later for reasons that I will describe. But that ball was one of the most astonishing events in New York City, in which almost everybody knew that the ball was going on. Taxi drivers knew. Oh, you're going to the ball. And you had to wear a mask. That was the only difference between Monroeville's black and white ball and New York's. In fact, you all really should have worn masks tonight. It would have added a touch. I had a friend who made masks, and he made one for me, but it was made very late on, and it was still, when I put it on, full of glue. And I went to the ball, but I don't really remember very much about it because of the glue. I've always wondered what sniffing glue is like, and never felt that I had to be forced to do so by wearing this mask. But it was a grand occasion. So I have to compliment you all, every one of you, practically, wearing some version of what you think is black and white. I, of course, well, I'll tell you about the collapse of my friendship first with Truman Capote. I wrote a parody once. I couldn't resist it. You may remember the famous Hemingway story, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, which is about a man who has a poisoned leg, gangrene, and he, in the Serengeti, is lying on a cot and is waiting for a plane to drop in and fly him back to Nairobi, to the hospital. And as he lies there on this cot, he thinks back on all his enemies, and it's a very famous story, perhaps Hemingway's most famous short story. And one day it occurred to me to write a parody of this, as if not Hemingway, but Truman was writing this. It was called The Snows of Studio 54. And in it, Truman Capote had just been to a fat farm near San Diego and had had his face visited and also his behind. And he was sitting, waiting for the plane to take him back to New York and to Studio 54. And in this parody, he thought back on all his enemies. Truman did not like the parody when it appeared in Harper's Magazine. And he refused to talk to me, but at parties he would talk very loudly about me in a voice very high and that would carry for blocks. So in a way, our friendship collapsed, although I was told that he used to lie in his bed at night and have people read this parody to him. He liked it. Also tonight, I was impressed by Mr. Knorr and his film that appeared on the screen there. There were a number of astonishing things about it. One was that he looks, in profile, Mr. Knorr, exactly like Truman Capote, astonishingly. Second, nobody but Mr. Knorr and Truman could look into a camera and talk at that length. And so, in his own words, hats off to Mr. Knorr. I will never, as long as I live, and we were joking about it here, think of someone taking the Green Mile, which you do know is the walk to the execution chamber, and seeing on the wall these paintings by Mr. Knorr. I don't know whether I would feel better or worse. The most striking image I have ever known. People want to be in the Tate Gallery, you know. The Green Mile. Anyway, hooray for Mr. Knorr. As I watched this, I kept thinking, what sort of a painting would he paint of me? Now, he said there was a halo over the picture. Now, if Mr. Knorr were to paint me, he would obviously have to know that I had done all these things. He would have to know, for an example, that I tried, and I should explain what I do in life, which is that, and Matt suggested it, is that what I do, I'm called a participatory journalist. And that means that I try to do things in sports and in various crafts that only the professionals do. There was a famous writer named Paul Gallico, who was a sports writer for the Daily News in New York. And he felt that if you were going to write about sports, you ought to learn sports at the very highest level, that it wasn't fair to criticize somebody for striking out in the bottom of the ninth inning World Series unless you yourself had seen how a major league curveball behaves. And so he had climbed down out of the press box, this reporter, and he caught Herb Pennock's curveball. He played golf with Bobby Jones. He got into the ring with Jack Dempsey, who was the heavyweight champion of the world, up in Saratoga Springs just before Dempsey and the great Firpo fight. And Dempsey was a man who didn't like to find anybody in the ring with him. And so Paul Gallico, this sports writer, was in there for 43 seconds. And he had very little to write about the next morning. Couldn't remember very much. All sorts of things. He played tennis with Vinnie Richards, who was Bill Tilden's great rival. Oddly, the things that scared him more than anything else in the world, and he wrote about this in a wonderful book which inspired me to do all these things, was to stand on the 15-meter diving board and looking down at a pool. And the other thing was to be in the locomotive, the cab of a locomotive going through the switch yards in Gary, Indiana. That terrified him. Anyway, he wrote this book called Farewell to Sport, and then went on to write The Poseidon Adventure, the Mrs. Arrow's stories, became a very successful novel writer. Wrote The Snow Goose, that famous parable about the Second World War. Well, in this chapter, he describes all these things, and I went to my editors at Sports Illustrated to see if I could do the same sort of thing. So Mr. Knoll, you see, in his painting of me, would have to have a baseball sitting there, a little bit like that pill in his painting of Truman Capote, that little yellow pill. I thought that was a wonderful touch. It meant so much, you know, the inability to sleep. And he would have to put this baseball in there. He would have to put a football, because I played with the Detroit Lions as their last string quarterback, and lost in 4 plays, 32 yards, and then playing with the Baltimore Colts in a game against the Detroit Lions in Ann Arbor, Michigan. 103,000 people watching, exhibition game, and I was sent in for 4 plays, and we made 18 yards when I was in there, 15 of them on a roughing the passer penalty. And he would have to put in, Mr. Knoll, he would have to put in a tennis racket, because I played against Pancho Gonzalez in tennis. And he would have to put in a couple of golf balls, because I played on the PGA Tour. The last time I was in Monroeville, we went to see and had lunch, as I recall, in the golf course in a desperate attempt to find Harper Lee. We heard that Harper Lee played golf. And boy, did I find a lot of time peering in doors and windows trying to find Harper Lee in this town. She may be here in the audience, but I have no idea who she is. I admire her enormously, but we couldn't find her. My search in Monroeville for Harper Lee. And so I know your golf course. It seems to have doubled in size since I saw that. That's all right. Maybe it'll triple in size by the time I come back again. So Mr. Knoll had golf balls in his, would have to have golf balls in there. He would also have to have a triangle, because I play the triangle with the New York Philharmonic Symphony Orchestra, to learn about what it is like to be a member of an orchestra. And there are terrifying things that can happen about a triangle. People worry, people criticize. Franz Liszt, second piano concerto, had too much triangle in it. He was heavily criticized for this. So we triangle players are very upset by that sort of thing. There are 2, 3, and many things that can happen about the triangle. One of them is you pick up the triangle and you can't find the stick to hit it with as your moment is coming up. The other is you pick up the stick and you can't find the triangle. Very complicated stuff. Anyway, I played with the New York Philharmonic. Also, Mr. Knoll would have to put a conductor's baton in there. I was once asked by the San Diego Symphony Orchestra if I would come out and conduct the orchestra for charity. It was to raise money for public television. And I said I was terribly honored, but they understand that I could not read music. And they said, it doesn't make any difference, all you've got to do is come out here and they'll bring the people in and everything. So I bought a record, and they wanted me to conduct Leonard Bernstein's Overture to Candide, which lasts about 8 minutes. And I bought this score. I thought that would be interesting to try to read this on the way out in the plane. And I thought people would look over and they would say, look, there's a conductor reading the score. And so we got out there. I got out there and went to the theater. And we would have a rehearsal. And so Mr. Anderson, who was the conductor of the San Diego Symphony Orchestra, handed me the stick, the baton. And I went out and stood on the podium and looked out, and there were about as many people in the orchestra as you are sitting here, almost. Not quite as many, but pretty impressive. They were all in black and white, come to think of it. I had not thought of this, an astonishing parallel. Mr. Knorr would have been fascinated by it. And he would have gone on about it at some length. Yes, he would have talked about different colors too, and how he's going to incorporate them in the painting. At any rate, it is one of the more exciting things that you can do in life. Stand in front of 100 musicians, and you bring the stick down and they start, and all this music comes through you like this. First of all, it's a very powerful thing to do, because when you do this, all the violins get tucked in under shoulders like this. People raise the instrument. Power. In fact, I think that's why conductors tend to live to be 106. You know, it's not only the power of controlling all these people, but this music swelling through you. At any rate, I thought it sounded pretty much like what I'd heard on the record, those things that the same music I've been conducting in front of the mirror with a number 2 pencil. But Mr. Anderson came out from the wings when we finished, and he took the stick away from me. And he looked at his musicians. He said to them, now, I want you to do something that is against the grain of all orchestral musicians. Do not look at this man. And I, of course, was thunderstruck by this, and he took me down below into a green room. Not the Green Mile, but the Green Room. And down there he said, now look, all I want you to do is start them off. Just bring the stick down and get them going. Don't make any sharp movements. Just ride like a cobra. He said, that's all I want you to do. And that's it. And so I went back up, and the audience filed in to fill the place. It was packed. This charity for public television. And I went out there, and we started. Backstage, Mr. Anderson was standing with a friend of mine, and Mr. Anderson had in his hand a can of Sprite, or some drink, Dr. Pepper. And suddenly, in the middle of Candide, Overture 2, he crushed it like this. And my friend whispered to him, look, he's an amateur. He's trying to help out public television. Give him a chance, it's all gone right. And Anderson whispered back, well, Jack the Ripper was an amateur, and they didn't give him the London Philharmonic to conduct. Well, you know something, I should get back to Truman Capote and why we're all here, you know, writers and this conference and Truman Capote along. You know why it's because there's whiskey in this water that makes it, this water is marvelous. I had whiskey before all of this. Is the mayor going to speak again? Who are you? It's Truman. None other than himself. You're down from the heavenly precincts.
Yes, and dressed quite appropriately, I think.
But this is astounding, Truman. You should be backstage somewhere.
Well, I know what astounds you, George. You're surprised to see me in this costume, aren't you?
Damn right.
You thought I'd be wearing red and bearing a pitchfork, wouldn't you?
Damn right. Well, I am surprised. How did you manage to get by St. Peter?
Well, George, he told me that on the whole, the ranks of Alabama writers are filled with sinners and reprobates.
That's so?
But that given the sweetness of the literature that generates in this state, God decided to make a special dispensation for us. When an Alabama writer appeared at the portals of heaven, St. Peter just waves us on through.
This is all improvised, I'm not sure. No, Too bad the dispensation doesn't extend to native of other states. But why are you here now, Truman?
Well, I have a bone to pick with you, George.
You have a bone to pick with me?
Yes, about that book you wrote, Truman Capote, in which various friends, enemies, acquaintances, and detractors recall his turbulent career.
That's the title, but what's the problem?
Well, Mr. P, to coin a phrase, there is a powerful and obnoxious odor of mendacity about that book. Well, yes. No wonder you waited until I was dead to write it.
Now, come on, True. You, of all people, to complain? Weren't you the one who said that you invented yourself and then invented a world to fit you?
Well, yes.
And didn't you say that when you describe things, that not the way they actually happened, but the way they should have happened?
I did.
And you're telling me there's an odor of mendacity? Why, even your old dear friend Arnold here, I'm getting to be Truman here, says in my book, Truman, terrible lie. We all know, well, that's you. But more than the point, you open your confess, begin to sound like the mayor. You open the confess doctrine, too.
George, do I have to teach you to read at this point in your career?
What?
Well, I'm really surprised at your lack of discernment in this matter. Don't you know that the one ineluctable rule of human nature is that one always reserves right for oneself what he would deny to others? I'm not bothered a shred by my lying. It's others that pisses me off.
It does. What? What's that word you use here in Montgomery? No, we're not Montgomery. We're in Monroeville. Pisses me off. Is that what you said?
Oh, yes.
Well, I guess you got me there.
Well, now, let's take the case of someone actually in your book. Our mutual acquaintance, the outrageous Gore Vidal. Well, he said I had a voice so high that only dogs could understand it.
Very good line, that one.
Well, I guess this isn't going to be settled here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just leave my case with you for to decide. But there's also a matter of pure factual error in your book.
No, kid. Name one.
Okay. You said that the Kansas Bureau of Investigation agent Harold Nye tells about coming to my room with some other KBI agents, and he says that I'm in a kind of pink negligee, silk with lace. Well, let me tell you, George, anybody with eyes in his head would have known that negligee was watermelon red.
Well, my goodness. Now, that's a very serious offense, True. If I ever do another edition of the book, I'll get that straightened out.
I really had you going there for
Oh,
this,
you
my
did.
George.
Yep.
The pure truth is I don't give a pea turkey about what anybody thinks or says about me.
No, kid. Well, you got me going there for a while. I should have known better. Now, how long are you down here on Earth?
Well, not long. I must get back to heaven to write my book. It's called George Plimpton.
Oh.
With friends, enemies, acquaintances, detractors, and me, Truman Capote, recall his turbulent career.
My goodness.
Triangles and everything.
Yeah. Aren't you supposed to leave now?
Well,
Get out of here.
I'll do whatever I please. It is my hometown,
You sure is.
but I'm taking this with me.
Take some of that water with you. Well, I don't know who that was, but come on out and take a bow. That was pretty good, as Truman. I think that's the end of the my speech. I didn't write that, but I think the author should be congratulated. Is he here somewhere? His play is going to be on tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow night, and I hope you could all... I only gave him one line, which was that Gore Vidal did indeed say of Truman that his voice was so high that only dogs could understand it. Is there anything I can tell you about, or should we have some? You know why this water is so good is that Dr. Johnson put some whiskey in it, and that's the reason that, I know that's illegal in a community center, but he did, and I feel just terrific. I'm sure it's the water, and I'll tell you something. I've been in Monroeville once. This is interesting. The mayor, if I understood her, said that what happens is that wives come to this town, and they drink the water, and they have twins. And my wife, not my wife then, came to this town, and guess what? We have 7-year-old twins. And I've always wondered why. And now I know. And I can hardly wait to tell her that it was the water in Monroeville that did it, and not me. I don't think we need any questions. Isn't it getting on time for whiskey and ribaldry out on the golf course and falling into sand traps and congratulating people who performed wonderfully tonight and look at each other's black and white gowns and ties and everything? And should we have a... How do you close ceremonies in Monroeville? Is there a blessing?
I'll come back.
There.
We really appreciate your presence, and I'm sure that Mr. Plimpton will be happy to autograph your books before he leaves. Thank you.